So my talk tonight is called Almshouses in Richmond, History, Heritage and Community. So I suppose the best place to start is to pose the question, what is an almshouse? So the 15th century definition was a little house, cell or chamber with a chimney and other necessaries in the same, in which each of them may by himself eat and drink and rest, and sometimes attend to contemplation and prayer. The Almshouse Association, the national umbrella body which supports all almshouse charities, has recently come up with a new definition, which is now recognised by the Charity Commission. So the new definition of an almshouse is a unit of accommodation which belongs to a charity, is provided exclusively for the charity's purposes, and is occupied under a licence by a qualified beneficiary. An almshouse is usually a charity for the relief of financial hardship by the provision of housing. In addition, an almshouse charity is likely to have one or more of the following features. So the origin of the charity is a private gift for the relief of poverty. The beneficiaries are required to pay a weekly maintenance contribution that must not be set at a level that would cause hardship. The nature of the accommodation is such that the licence requires that beneficiaries must show particular consideration for the needs of others, and the beneficial class or the geographical area from which residents are drawn is restricted. So the majority of almshouses around the country were established to house people later in life. However, some almshouse charities house younger people or families, and others were established to support particular groups. So, for example, there's a charity called the Printing Charity. They support people who've worked in the print sector. And the Soldiers, Sailors and Airmen's Families Association have almshouses for people retiring from the armed forces and their families. Almshouses are often of historic and architectural significance, and many are listed buildings. The classic almshouse estate is a three-sided courtyard with individual units set around shared facilities such as a chapel and grounds. So here are some examples of almshouses in Stamford, Isleworth, the Hospital of St Cross in Winchester, and Bristol almshouse charities. We've got some more examples here from Bourneville and Leicestershire, Halifax, down in Cornwall, Church Street almshouses in Stratford-upon-Avon, they're particularly beautiful, Bybury in the Cotswolds, Warwick, Lord Leicester almshouses, the Barbican in London, Charterhouse almshouses, and down in Kent in Faversham. You can see the range of different architectural styles, but all are recognisable as almshouses. So the history of almshouses stretches back to medieval times, when religious orders cared for the poor. The oldest surviving almshouse foundation is thought to be this one, the Hospital of St Oswald in Worcester, which was founded circa 990. Provision for care of the poor by monastic houses lapsed entirely in some places at the dissolution of the monasteries towards the middle of the 16th century. Provision for the poor, including the elderly, then passed largely to parishes. Though provision could be based on charities established by craft guilds or livery companies, in the main, it was through the endowments made by the gentry and nobility, clergy, merchants and royalty. In part through conscience, but also perhaps with the possibility of securing their own salvation and even of self-advertisement, today's equivalent of having one's name up in lights. Across England today, there are 1,700 almshouse charities, housing approximately 37,000 people. The vast majority of these are very small, having usually between 5 and 10 almshouses each. There are just 8 almshouse charities with more than 100 units, the Richmond Charities being one of these. So almshouses in England cover almost the entire country. You can find them in every county. You can find them in both rural and urban settings. Interestingly, there are hardly any almshouses in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. This is because most of them were unfortunately subsumed into the council house model after the Second World War. Crucially, in England, with the establishment of the Almshouse Association in 1946, almshouses were protected. The association was formed to safeguard the interests of almshouse buildings and the welfare of residents. The objects of the association are to assist charities to manage their resources effectively, to support them in providing good quality housing for those in need, to promote the welfare and independence of residents, and to preserve the historic tradition of almshouses for future generations. The association works hard to protect the almshouse model from regulation that would harm or force a change to its charitable structure. So the almshouse movement in England, therefore, is significant, both in terms of the number of people housed and in terms of the unique almshouse model, which differs from any other sort of affordable housing. Those of us who work in the almshouse world feel that almshouses are a very special form of housing which need promoting and protecting. So from the national perspective, I will now move to the local level and to almshouses in Richmond. The work of the Richmond charities housing and supporting elderly people in housing need in the Richmond borough goes back over 400 years. The first of Richmond's almshouses were Queen Elizabeth's, founded in 1600. From then on, over the centuries, wealthy benefactors continued to endow land and property for the building of almshouses. The charity now owns and manages 150 almshouses on 13 estates in Richmond, Twickenham and Mortlake, housing approximately 170 residents over the age of 65. From the reign of Edward III, who died in 1377, until the death of Charles I in 1649, Sheen Palace, seen on your screen, was a regular residence of the Kings and Queens of England. Built originally by Edward III as a country house, it was completely rebuilt by Henry VII after most of the house was destroyed by a fire in 1497. The new building was completed in 1502, and it became his principal country residence, designed and built on a scale worthy of a royal palace. This drawing from 1562 gives a good impression of its size and grandeur. In about 1500, Henry VII decreed a name change for the palace from Sheen to Richmond, reflecting his title of Earl of Richmond in Yorkshire before he became king. The surrounding area then adopted the same name in due course. It is unsurprising, therefore, that those associated with a court in residence, such as nobility, clerics, and wealthy commoners, were drawn to Richmond, and it is from these that benefactions were often received to establish some form of charity. This is probably the reason for the large number of almshouses in the Richmond borough, far more than are usually found in such a concentrated area. Many of these philanthropists and benefactors were moved by the poverty and hardship of good and deserving people, and found that the best way to meet their needs was to provide a roof over their heads and pensions of money, coal, clothing, or other goods. For example, almspeople at Queen Elizabeth's received bread, cheese, and beer money, whilst at Bishop Uppers they received a chicken live and £1 of bacon every Christmas. Mitchell's and Hickey's residents used to receive between 1 and 2.5 tons of coal each year and a greatcoat every 5 years. Richmond's first almshouses, Queen Elizabeth's, were endowed in 1600 by Sir George Wright on Ferry Hill near Richmond Hill. Wright, who was a Member of Parliament, named them in the Queen's honour, as Richmond Palace was one of her favourite residences, and in fact she died there in 1603. The almshouses were endowed for 8 poor women. Having fallen into disrepair, the almshouses were then rebuilt in 1767 in the Vineyard, Richmond. These were then damaged during the Second World War and replaced on the same site with 40 new built houses in 1955. And this is how they are today. The second almshouse endowment was made in 1661 by Brian Dupper, who was Bishop of Chichester and was a tutor to Charles, Prince of Wales, later Charles II, at Richmond Palace. Deprived of his bishopric during the time of Cromwell, Brian Dupper retired to a house in Whitaker Avenue, now the site of the old town hall in Richmond. He promised that if his pupil was restored to the throne, he would found almshouses in thanksgiving. And the almshouses were built on the terrace at the top of Richmond Hill for the benefit of 10 poor unmarried women. The present almshouses were built in 1851 in the vineyard after a deal was struck with James Ewing, owner of Down House, whose grounds adjoined the by then dilapidated almshouses. James Ewing provided the new site and paid for the rebuilding in exchange for the old almshouse site. The front arch and gateway, which you can see on the photo, were transferred from the original almshouse site and survive to this day. Mitchell's almshouses were founded in 1695 by Humphrey Mitchell for 10 poor men. The original block of almshouses on the vineyard was built in 1696 and, having fallen into disrepair, was rebuilt in 1810. An additional wing of 6 more almshouses was added in 1860. And this is how they look today. It's a beautiful almshouse estate with a gorgeous garden. The next estate was Houblon's. Houblon's almshouses was founded in 1757 by sisters Rebecca and Susanna Houblon, who were the unmarried daughters of Sir John Houblon, the first governor of the Bank of England, whose picture used to adorn our £50 notes until they were withdrawn from circulation in April 2014. Work started on the almshouses in 1756 and they were completed in 1758. They were for 9 poor unmarried women. These are the oldest almshouses still standing within the ownership of the Richmond Charities. Hickey's charity was founded by William Hickey, who died in 1728 and is buried in the churchyard of St Mary Magdalene, Richmond. In his will, he provided for pensions of £4 per annum for 6 poor men and 10 poor women. Hickey, as with Humphrey Mitchell, left a considerable amount of property in Richmond, including most of Richmond Hill, the area which is now known as the Richmond Hill Hotel, the Richmond Gate Hotel, Doughty House, the Wick, and other houses on the terrace at the top of Richmond Hill. And in 1822, the Hickey's charity was augmented with a gift from Elizabeth Doughty. In 1832, over 100 years after Hickey died, the trustees of the charity obtained permission to buy the present site and built 20 almshouses with a chapel. The west wing of 10 almshouses was for men and the east wing for women. And this is Hickey's today. In 1851, 8 more almshouses were built. In 1860, a house for the chaplain was built, and further almshouses were built on the site in 1834, 1972, and 1991. Going back in time, the Church Estate Charity is thought to be the oldest charity in Richmond, dating back to 1375. It was established to give financial support to Richmond Parish Church. Its almshouses were built in 1843 for men and women who were members of the Church of England. In 2004, the Richmond Charities took over the almshouses from the Church Estate Charity and they became part of our community. So originally, although each almshouse estate would have been a separate charity run by separate groups of trustees, it seems that there was always a great deal of interaction and cooperation between them, and indeed the same names of trustees pop up in the archives. It seems that at about the end of the 19th century, some of the charities began to join forces to be managed and administered by one board of trustees. So Houblon's, Bishop Duppers and Queen Elizabeth's became one charity, and then in 1927 they merged with Hickey's to be known as the Almshouse Charity of Hickey's and Others. I've always felt slightly sorry for the ones who were lumped together as others. It's not clear when Hickey's and Others and Mitchell's Almshouse Charity were first managed by the same board of trustees, but certainly before 1974. And then in 1987, a charity commission scheme merged the two charities. At that time, Mitchell's was the wealthier of the two, and the merger effectively bailed out Hickey's and Others. In 1983, before that merger, 6 new almshouses were built on the site of Ben's Cottages and are known as Ben's Walk Almshouses. These are located just off the main Richmond Circus roundabout on the A316. Since the turn of the century, as well as the merger with the Church Estate Almshouse Charity, there have been other mergers too. with the Richmond charities taking on smaller almshouse charities, which were running out of funds to keep their almshouses in good repair and support the residents, and also sometimes struggling to find trustees. The Almshouse Association is really supportive of larger charities taking over smaller ones in order to ensure that almshouses do not fall into disrepair and that residents can continue to be supported. So in 2008, the charity took over Candler Almshouses from Twickenham United Charities. Candler were built in 1936 to fulfil the bequest of William Candler, who died in 1907. Originally, however, the almshouses in Twickenham had been built in 1876 by Elizabeth Twining of the tea merchant family, who lived in Dial House in Twickenham until her death in 1889. Elizabeth Twining was a painter and author, best known for her detailed botanical illustrations. Candler's bequest led to the Twinings almshouses being replaced and increased in number. And then in 2021, we took over Mortlake Almshouse and Relief Charity with its 2 estates of 3 almshouses each. This is Juxon's. It was founded in 1626 by John Juxon, who was a relative of William Juxon, the then Archbishop of Canterbury. These almshouses are located in Milton Road. In 1707, the parish of Mortlake purchased 2 cottages from the Duke of Leeds, which were rebuilt by Edward Colston, a Mortlake resident, and Colston's almshouses were founded. As with Juxon's, the original almshouse buildings have been relocated on several occasions. These current almshouses were built in 1927 in Christchurch Road. There is some sensitivity amongst the residents of Colston's almshouses about Edward Colston, particularly since the toppling of his statue in Bristol in 2020 due to his role in the transatlantic slave trade. There is also a Colston Road in Mortlake, as he was a significant local philanthropist. The trustees of Mortlake Almshouse and Relief Charity decided in 2020, before the merger with us, to refer to them as Christchurch Road almshouses. As well as mergers, in the last 10 years, we have also been looking to build and develop new almshouse estates. Our first new development was the purchase in 2017 of an existing block of flats in Manning Place, just off Queen's Road, Richmond, which we converted into 12 almshouses. And then in 2020, we opened our first brand new build on Heath Road, Twickenham, an estate of 9 almshouses with 2 commercial units on the ground floor. I named this new estate Wright's Almshouses, as Sir George Wright, who you remember was the very, very first benefactor. He was one of the few original benefactors not to have his name immortalised in one of the charity's estates. In November 2024, building work completed on our most recent almshouse estate, the Elizabeth Twining Almshouses, a really exciting development of 5 fully wheelchair accessible almshouses on land already in our ownership, just off St Mary's Grove in Richmond. These new almshouses have been built to passive house standards, the highest level of energy efficiency accreditation which you can achieve, which will mean that residents living there will have virtually 0 energy costs, with all their energy being supplied from ground source heat pumps and photovoltaic panels. New residents moved in during December last year, and next week we are holding the official opening of the almshouses on the 2nd of April, and they're being opened by His Royal Highness the Duke of Gloucester, who is Vice Patron of the Almshouse Association. That's another view of the new almshouses. So the mergers and new developments over the last few years have increased our total number of almshouses to 150, up from 116 in 2015. And by the end of April this year, we will have increased further to 162, as we have another development currently underway on Queen's Road, Richmond, a new development of 12 almshouses being built on land which we purchased from another local charity, Richmond Parish Lands Charity, now known as Richmond Foundation. This development is due to complete by the end of April. This is how it looks now. The scaffolding's all come down. There's still some hoarding up. We've named these 2 new developments after 2 of our original benefactors who have not had an almshouse estate named after them, Elizabeth Twining and Elizabeth Doughty. So whilst the usual image of an almshouse is of a small cottage on a three-sided courtyard, as for instance I've shown you at Hublons and Hickeys, modern almshouses are built to very different standards and need to be future-proofed and fit for purpose for people in later life. Many people are surprised, for example, when they discover that Wright's is a block of almshouses. They are luxury flats, all level access with a lift and with all the aids that the elderly may need in later life. The 21st century is the era of new, modern almshouse building. And the Almshouse Association estimates that across the country, more almshouses are currently being built than in any period since the Victorian times. And over 1,000 new almshouses have been built in the last 10 years. A couple of other examples. I think that might be a walkie-talkie. I'll carry on. This is Tolson House in Isleworth, the building of which I was responsible for when I ran the Isleworth and Hounslow charity prior to moving to the Richmond charities. This is St Clement Danes Almshouses in Sydenham. I've been there, it's a beautiful block, fabulous accommodation. As well as, of course, building new, we have to maintain, protect and preserve and keep fit for purpose our existing older almshouses, both internally and externally. We have a duty of care, both to our residents, to keep them safe and warm, and also to our heritage assets. We are partway through a major project to install photovoltaic panels at most of our almshouse estates over the coming years, so that residents will benefit directly from the energy generated, and this will help keep their energy bills lower. We were delighted to receive an award from the Richmond Society for our project to date, in recognition of the lengths that we have gone to make the panels as inconspicuous as possible on our listed buildings. Maintaining the internal fabric of the almshouses is as important as the external fabric. Whenever an almshouse becomes vacant, which is usually only when a resident dies or needs to move into a care home, we fully refurbish them. New residents are always pleasantly surprised when they view an almshouse to see that although the external fabric may be historic, inside we modernise, we fit new kitchens and shower rooms. This is a recent refurbishment at Hickeys. So moving on, all almshouse charities around the country have their own individual criteria for appointing residents, established in line with the wishes of their benefactors. This is a very important part of an almshouse's history, and it's what the Charity Commission calls the spirit of the gift and must be adhered to. However, times have changed, and almshouse charities have rightly had to move away from the paternalistic attitudes of the past. In centuries gone by, it would have been usual to find the following on a list of qualifying criteria for new applicants to an almshouse charity. Applicants had to be of good character, of holy report and innocent conversation, and they could not be a common drunkard, a common scold or backbiter, a thief or of infamous life or evil name, guilty of perjury, an idiot or a lunatic, infected with any loathsome or foul disease, or my favourite, suspected of sorcery, witchcraft or charming. As you would expect, the Richmond Charities criteria is very different today. Applicants must be over 65, have lived in the borough for at least 2 years, be in need of housing, and preference and priority is given to those who are homeless, sofa surfing, or living in unaffordable private rented accommodation or under fear of eviction. They must have limited income and savings and be unable to provide for themselves by other means. And they must also be capable of living independently with the help of family and carers if necessary. We currently have about 170 residents, of whom 68% are female, 32% male. The ratio of women to men obviously fluctuates, but given on average women live for longer than men, we always have a higher percentage of women. Most residents are single, but we currently have 17 couples. Our current age range is 65 up to 99. In the recent past, we've had some residents over 100 still living independently. We have a rigorous application process, which involves initial checks to establish eligibility, and then a detailed application form, first interview, which I carry out, and then a second interview with 2 trustees. If an applicant is deemed eligible, they will be placed on our register as high, medium, or low priority, depending on their circumstances. Once appointed, residents have to remain a qualified beneficiary. We have to be able to show that at all times we're housing those who are most in need. And thus, if residents were to come into a large inheritance or win the lottery, for example, they would have to move out. However, the most common way that residents stop being a qualified beneficiary is if they reach the point where they can no longer live independently, even with the assistance of carers and social services. And then we work with next of kin and social services to find them more suitable accommodation. Once appointed, residents also have to abide by the charity's rules. The original benefactors laid down lists of rules and tables of fines and penalties. Almspeople, who were then called inmates, were sometimes encouraged to tell on their neighbours. Fines were then distributed amongst the almspeople, and thus not much encouragement was needed for them to tell on each other. As with the application criteria, times have changed, and nowadays our rules mainly relate to not getting into rent arrears, not causing antisocial behaviour, and being a good neighbour. But it's amusing to look back at the rules from days gone by. These are probably too small for you to read, but some of the rules, this is from Mitchell's charity. Inmates had to attend divine service every Sunday and Holy Day. They could not keep a hog in any of the almshouses. No tippling or drinking in any common alehouse or gin shop was permitted. No begging, swearing, blaspheming, fighting, smashing glass windows, destroying the almshouse, or giving away the gift of a gown. And almspeople were not permitted to spend their time in idleness, but to employ it in some useful work, in reading the Holy Bible and other good books, in prayer and giving thanks and praise to God. Times have also changed in how we support our residents. In line with the charity's governing document, which states that trustees should use funds for such charitable purposes for the benefit of the residents as the trustees decide, we now help and support our residents in other ways, such as organising and funding events, activities, outings and social occasions, in order to strengthen our communities and enable our residents to keep socially active, which we find helps with their physical, emotional and mental well-being in their later years. Almshouses really are designed to be a home for life, and we pride ourselves not just on providing accommodation for those in need, but on providing thriving communities. So, for example, we hold garden parties every year at the Almshouse estate and take residents out for Christmas lunch. We run outings and we hold daily activities in our beautiful chapel at Hickey's, in our garden room at Church Estate, and in a terrace room at Wrights, our 3 communal spaces. Daily activities include line dancing, Zumba, Tai Chi, yoga, bingo, book club, bridge club, Scrabble, chess, meditation, chapel services, gardening club, Nordic walking, croquet, craft and sewing club and film club. We run an annual Almshouses in Bloom competition for residents to enter their individual gardens into. Our communal spaces are a really important part of our community. Residents can book and use the rooms for their own parties as well. Here are some photos from a recent tropical themed summer party attended by 120 residents along with staff and trustees. We had a steel band, Caribbean barbecue, chocolate fountain, coconut shy, and even a conga around Hickey's. We produce a monthly magazine for our residents called Your Almshouse Magazine, and we carry out forums and surveys to listen to their views about their homes and about how the charity is run. One of the questions in a recent survey asked residents why they love living in our community. And here are some of their responses. Companionship and safety, happy and friendly community, warmth and progressive, security and smiles, committed, caring, capable, the community spirit, one big happy family, amazing staff team, our beautiful gardens and grounds, a sense of belonging, the amazing generosity of the charity, mutual support amongst the residents, and a first-class community project that really works. Staff and trustees' support for residents also contributes to their sense of well-being. I run a staff team of 14, which includes my head office team and staff in our 2 estate offices. Our scheme managers are responsible for the overall well-being of residents, and our chaplain provides pastoral support. There is always a scheme manager on call 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, and residents also have a care line system so that they can summon help quickly in an emergency. As I mentioned earlier, our residents range in age currently from 65 to 99. The younger ones who are living full, active and independent lives clearly do not need as much support from staff. But as residents get older and perhaps become physically more frail, or suffer from conditions such as dementia, they may need a visit every day from staff, as well as having the support of carers and family. Our trustee board supports me in setting our overall strategic direction and objectives as we continue to look to the future and expand our almshouse provision. We have a very strong board with a good mix of skills, including financial management, property, welfare, HR and marketing. Both the strong and harmonious community aspects of living in an almshouse community, as well as support from staff, are the reasons why many of us in the almshouse movement have long believed that residents probably live longer in an almshouse community than they might otherwise. A recent report commissioned by the Almshouse Association, to which we, along with other charities around the country, contributed data, has shown that on average, living in an almshouse community boosts the life expectancy of someone from a low socio-economic group to that of a general member of the public by about 2.5 years. In addition, councils around the country are finally waking up to the fact that having almshouses within their local area is hugely beneficial for a number of reasons. Firstly, that almshouse communities provide a different sort of housing for those in later life. And councils are coming to see that it's not just the amount of affordable housing in a local area, which is crucial, but the variety of different forms of housing. And secondly, another study has shown the financial benefits provided by almshouses to the local economy. This report, produced by the Housing, Learning and Improvement Network, has calculated the benefits provided by almshouses to the health and social care economy as follows. Almshouse residents have a lower likelihood of residential care admission. There's a reduction in the need for domiciliary care. There's a reduction in ambulance call-outs due to falls because we have staff on site. There's a reduction in the length of hospital stays. There's a reduction in GP and A&E visits as a result of lower incidence of loneliness because they're living in a community with support. The freeing up of housing in the wider housing market. And the report estimates that living in an almshouse generates financial benefits to the social care and health economy of around £1,340 per resident per annum. And overall, therefore, the financial contribution made by the almshouse sector nationwide each year is £43 million. So how is the Richmond Charities funded? As I've already touched on, most almshouse charities were founded through legacies and endowments. Although many smaller almshouse charities are not wealthy, hence the need for mergers, as I talked about earlier, the Richmond Charities is extremely fortunate to have had very sizable bequests made over the centuries. As well as our 150 almshouses, we also own roughly 140 investment properties in Richmond, which are let out at market rents, and the income from that helps subsidise our charitable almshouse work and also our grant giving to those in need in the borough. So the charity's assets are made up of the almshouses themselves. Most of them are at nil value in the account, except for the new builds, which are valued at about 10 million. We have the investment properties valued at just over 100 million. We have invested funds currently with Saracen and CCLA, our fund managers, of approximately 30 million. So our total assets are about 140 million. And our income and expenditure we have just got the new draft accounts to the end of 2024, but these are the figures to the end of 2023. So our income was £4.5 million. That's made up from rents from investment properties, weekly maintenance contributions, that's what the Almshouse rents are called, from housing benefit usually, from Almshouse residents, and dividends from funds invested with Saracen and CCLA. And annual expenditure was 3.7 million, of which the largest area of expenditure was staffing costs and major works, refurbishments and maintenance works on all properties. So the surpluses that we build up year on year go towards the cost of major works, such as our big photovoltaic projects, and also to fund our new developments, such as the Elizabeth Twining and the Elizabeth Doughty Almshouses. We are also able to sell investment properties if we need funds in order to build more almshouses. So finally, looking ahead, what are the challenges for the almshouse movement and for the Richmond charities in particular? The almshouse movement must maintain its independence and not get subsumed into general social housing regulation, which is not applicable to charities. And the Almshouse Association works very hard on that cause. We need to find more almshouse development opportunities in a crowded borough in order to build more almshouses. We need to ensure that our historical buildings remain fit for purpose for the 21st century, which is challenging, especially when buildings are listed. We also need to adapt to the increasing expectations of new residents and consider how we adapt almshouses to create homes fit for the future. In terms of space, many of our almshouses are small. Could we look at knocking two into one? Increasing mobility issues of residents as they live longer and have difficulties with stairs. The energy efficiency issues of the old almshouses. Technology, for example, not being able to put satellite dishes or cable TV on listed buildings or have enough spaces for electric scooter charging points. Almshouse charities have to continue to evolve and adapt and meet the changing needs of those in later life. People are living longer. We are, for example, seeing more incidents of dementia and Alzheimer's amongst our resident group, and enabling those residents to remain living at home for the rest of their life presents new challenges. We need to ensure that we continue to treat residents with dignity and respect, and all almshouse charities must move away from the old-fashioned paternalistic model. Treating residents with dignity and respect and listening to their views is paramount. As society around us becomes more diverse, so does our community, and we are seeing many more applicants for accommodation with complex and multiple health needs, including wide-ranging mental health issues. This presents challenges for our staff team and for our community in binding in those who may find it difficult to engage with others. And finally, in terms of need, although Richmond on the surface is a wealthy borough, that masks poverty underneath, and we are certainly seeing an increase in need year on year for good quality, supported housing within a community for those over 65, and I do not anticipate that need decreasing. So thank you very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed the talk. For more information, I brought along some leaflets, some of our recent editions of our Almshouse magazine, and please do have a look at our website. Thank you for listening, and I'm very happy to take questions.